Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm a social studies educator, historian, and host of this, the Everything is a Primary Source podcast. I'm also an avid collector of popular culture artifacts. I love what I find at thrift store outlets, garage sale leftovers, and what I spot just making my way around the built world. I enjoy sorting through boxes of free books and magazines, not to mention online collections like Internet Archive, and of course the Library of Congress. But you don't need to spend your time digging through bins or following online rabbit holes to get a look into the past. The movies and TV we watch, the books we read, and the games we play are all documents of the past. So is fashion, food, music, toys, even the roads we travel on and the places we live and work in. Everything is a primary source. Elaine, how's it going?
It's going great.
You having a good time at NCSS
I
Boston?
am, because I love to talk to teachers. I was one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And how long was your career?
Okay, 45 years.
That's impressive. That's I'm sure you had plenty of students who knew you and then became parents of students of yours. That must have been a great feeling.
It was good. And then I went into curriculum, and then I taught at the university. So, yeah.
Of your entire time teaching social studies,
Social studies.
what was your greatest joy? What was the subject matter that you enjoyed talking to your students about the most?
U.S. history. I really enjoyed U.S. history from its conception, and I always tried to integrate great literature in with the studies. Like, we do like the Crucible or something like that, and yeah.
I have a feeling that most of the people here at this conference right now have a very similar philosophy about teaching social studies. We wouldn't be here if we didn't, right? If all we wanted to do was just, go to the printer and copy off a bunch of worksheets to fill out and crossword puzzles and stuff.
No.
You're not interested in talking with other professionals and getting new ideas and incorporating them and things like that. So, what kind of technology, what kind of resources were available at the height of your career? What did you tend to go to the most to accentuate? I know you mentioned stories and literature and things like
stories. People relate to stories, and people relate to things that actually happened. And students still need to understand complete stories.
Yeah.
Now, my technology, when I started, at 21, teaching, there wasn't even computers. There was nothing.
Right.
We didn't even have a Xerox machine. We had a Ditto machine.
Oh, I remember those. They smelled great. The ink, right? The purple ink.
Right, and then you'd go home with purple ink all over your hands, yeah. So it's changed a lot, but I had to change with it to keep up with my students and to keep up with I worked with a lot of social studies teachers. Yeah.
And so it's, I suppose there's certain intangible qualities that every social studies teacher, no matter what time period they're teaching, whether it's the age of Ditto runoffs or AI, that there's a certain intangible quality of being able to connect things to real life, being a genuine person.
Absolutely.
And if you're going to be telling stories in class, that they are something that teaches, right, and has a purpose behind it. So you shared with me the book that you wrote.
Yes.
A Young Man on the Front Line, Lessons of War. And you said this is your father's memoirs.
It's my father's memoirs, from his diaries and from the morning reports and the things. It's all primary sources.
I was going to say, so you know from my sign that I am a primary source aficionado. It's all and I don't even say that. I'm not like I could tell you a primary source for every single topic, but I love looking at things, traditional and non-traditional primary sources. And was this gifted to you by your father? Did you get things directly from him?
Yes, yeah. I had his diaries. He kept a diary.
Yeah.
And I had little stories he wrote out that he remembered from, his men and him. And we videotaped him. And then I put the memoirs together from those sources, from his point of view. So he is telling the story, and that's his voice is what is capturing,
I'm imagining it's a pretty emotional thing for you to do.
Yeah, it was an emotional thing for me to do. And I completed it shortly after his passing. But we had gone to Washington, D.C. to see the memorial, and we went to the Holocaust Museum, and he gave testimony from his concentration camp. They opened up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that was very healing for him, because you don't forget those you lose. And he always thought, who's going to remember these people when he's gone?
His generation has been referred to retroactively as the greatest generation. I don't think they saw themselves that way while they were doing their job. It was just kind of what they did. It was the world that was handed to them, and that's what they dealt with.
Right.
That being said, what did you think about the memorial, the World War II Memorial in Washington? Do you like it? Do you think it's fitting to that generation?
He liked it, okay. He thought that they represented well the two fronts, the Pacific and the European front, and those theaters, they call them. And then each state had their thing. And
so I always found that a little bit odd to me, because the war wasn't fought state by state.
No.
Right? So
no.
You're from Michigan originally, and I assume he was from Michigan.
Yes.
I'm assuming some of his comrades were from all over the United States.
Oh, they were from all over the United States, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so that memorial came in a later time. I think it was well overdue. They should have had that monument installed.
It was a long time.
And I realized that, the Iwo Jima one at Arlington National Cemetery was much earlier. That has a whole story behind it all of its own. That one was fitting to the time period that was made. And the World War II one and the mall is fitting to the time period that was made, early 2000s, where by that point, monuments and memorials were far more than just statues of great men and the words that they said chiseled next to them. It was more immersive, interactive. So I get the design, and I too like the theater side of it, and the victory by air, victory in the air, victory on sea, victory on land. The state thing always kind of like, this is more seems like a civil war.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think part of that is that when you go to the memorial, or you take your kids to the memorial, you can go where you live, where your kids live, and read, something about that. And so I think they tried to show the whole country contributed. And the stories were from everywhere.
Yeah.
Every state, was affected.
And I suppose looking at it that way, it's not just because you look at the Washington Monument, you're not going to learn a lot from that. I mean, you could, and there's actually a lot of symbology in its parts and things like that, but it's an obelisk.
It doesn't tell a story.
Right. It doesn't have that same, the symbology is different from a story. This one is like a museum and monument simultaneously.
Yes.
Would you say that was the same thing for your book? It's a story, but it's also a memorial?
Yes, exactly. It's a story that has lessons that are pertinent to today, and also explains the way the world is set up today, and how things are a continuation of the conflicts previous, and it's just something students can relate to. They can relate to an 18-year-old trying to lead his, men in a hard situation. They can relate to having to make ethical decisions, being responsible for their behaviors, and learning about humanity.
Yeah.
And there's a part in the book where my dad and his men take some prisoners of war, German prisoners of war. And, of course, they have to go through the military thing. You search them, take off any documents. And his men were hungry, so they were eating their rations, but the crackers were stale, so they threw them on the ground. And these prisoners of war were asking their sergeant, can we eat those crackers? And my dad says, what's going on? And he said, well, my men would like to eat those crackers. And he goes, you hungry? He goes, we haven't eaten in 48 hours. So they're giving them rations, right? So they're sharing a meal, and they had originally been shooting at each other.
I know.
And then they're showing each other's pictures of their kids. And it's like, and you're 19, how do you put these contradictions together?
It's such a remarkable, that's not even the big enough word to say it, remarkable that they were able to handle that.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Amazing.
I mean, and I know that there was post-traumatic stress. They called it shell shock back then. It wasn't understood quite the same way. But the culture didn't really even support any feelings of victimhood or
trauma.
Feel sorry for myself because I saw terrible things. They just
well, they all did.
They were silent.
There were so many of them.
When they got home, they didn't really talk about it. You could always tell the guys that. My dad's dad was in combat in Germany. During the last phase of the war. We know he has a Purple Heart.
Yeah.
We can only assume what he must have
had
done.
to be wounded.
And and it had something to do with being trapped in a barn, and some Germans showed up while he was there, and so he must have done something to get out of there.
Yes.
He never talked about it.
They didn't, and my father didn't talk to me until I was in my 50s. And then as he got older and he was trying to put it together in his mind, accept, everything. And then he began talking not just about the funny things that happened to him, but about the very serious things, And I remember towards the end of the book, we were at a family gathering, and there was a veteran there who had just come back from Afghanistan. And he was sitting by himself in the living room. And my dad went and sat next to him, and he said, I was in combat. And then there was immediate connection. And he said to my father, does this ever go away? And he goes, no. But this is how you can help humanity with, but he said that was me in 1946, sitting in a living room, not able to talk to anybody.
Yeah.
And here we are in, 2000, he's talking to a young boy,
It's, they didn't have, it's like being on an alien planet.
Yeah.
After you see those things, and then go back to.
Yeah, and my father never could handle like trivial conversation. If it got too jittery, he would just not talk.
Yeah, it's foolish. I suppose one big difference between his experience of returning home and that of, say, somebody from the War on Terror is that he returned to a country that was almost 100%
united,
supported behind what they were doing. And the reason for any success that the GIs had over in Europe and in the Pacific was because of the all-hands-on-deck approach of the country. And you don't get that later on, that the whole country is just kind of doing its own thing. There's a bunch of guys overseas, but and they come back and they integrate back into society. Where I'm from, seacoast of New Hampshire, there's it's all but defunct. There's a Air National Guard base there now, but the base I grew up on, because I'm an Air Force brat. During that whole era of the War on Terror, it was Pease Air Force Base, and they have what's called the Pease Greeters. and comprised of just people from the public, a lot of veterans, of course. And they, any time of day or night, if a outbound plane of soldiers was leaving to go overseas or an inbound one, they were there to see them off, because they knew a few miles inland they wouldn't get any of that.
I used to fly into Maine a lot when I was doing curriculum, and I would go into Bangor, and that's a place where they ship the troops in and out. I always knew if they were going or coming back, because if they were going, it was very quiet, and when they came back, they were like, let's get a hamburger, let's do this, let's do that, and they were just so excited to be home. And I remember I was the only one who was not in the service, and I was eating in a cafeteria in the airport, and one of the planes or something backfired. Everybody hit the ground but me. And I looked around and I go, oh my gosh, I guess I'm not very well trained, am I? And they're like, oh, but
in
just
Bangor,
instant.
right?
Just instant, yeah.
That they have, it's such an admiration. I myself have never served that way. I see what I do, and this sounds ridiculous, but I see being a teacher as a service, national service.
It is a service. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Helping kids understand the world around them, the country around them, and things like that. But nothing compared to military service. But I was just explaining in my class the other day that I've always had because of my upbringing, a bias in favor of people in uniform.
Yes.
That I recognize that for whatever reason that they join the military, and there's dozens of reasons that you join, but if nothing else, you're trading off a part of your life, potentially risking it.
Yes.
And even if you survive, the things that you will see in a war zone is incomparable to anything.
There's nothing to equate it with.
Right.
When they come home, and he was in the class of 1944. He graduated from high school in 1944. Almost every graduate in 1944 was drafted. And my dad always said, I walked across the stage and they put a diploma in one hand and they put a gun in the other. And he left right away for
Isn't that
basic.
Wild? I mean, that's imagine being in high school, entering into high school in 1942, anytime after the United States declared war, or even before the United States declared war on Japan, and knowing that the nature of warfare at that time was not like it is now. Like, we'll never have a draft again because we don't fight wars. It's all drones and subterfuge and, CIA stuff. It's not...
You got to put boots on the ground at some point.
Yeah, but it's never
not
to the capacity
extent of that. Yes.
And it's so technological. It's that a high school student doesn't have to think that way. We have selective service still, but that's it's a holdover of the war before World War II. And so with this generation, imagine approaching graduation day and knowing, just reading the newspapers and listening to the radio and watching the newsreels, this thing's not resolving itself.
Right.
I'm probably going to be involved in some way or another.
Yeah. He was trained down in Mississippi, and he said he was in ROTC in high school, and he walked in, and they're taking their names and high school diploma. He goes, yes, and they go, you're a sergeant. That was it. Okay, and
it's just that easy. This photograph caught my attention.
This is a photograph my father found on a deceased German soldier, and this is a group of German fighters, young Army, and it just shows how they looked exactly like the pictures of my dad and his men, and youth and hopeful and serving their country and just... And going back to your story before about the crackers and everything, things like this just demonstrate the frivolity of war, just how frivolous it is. My dad always said war solves nothing. He was He was all for diplomacy.
You can't find, it still is true today, the most vehemently anti-war people, usually ones who've seen it.
The ones who've seen it. And he knew that we had to stay strong. We had to have a strong army, navy, whatever. And,
I bet this handsome man was a hit in Paris, right?
Yeah. That's an interesting story. He went on leave to Paris because they had been in a terrible battle and he had lost some men and he needed a rest.
Yeah.
He goes to Paris and he actually stops the rape of a young French girl by a soldier.
Another U.S. soldier?
Who was above him in rank. And the soldier, of course, had been drinking and had been on the front and just, and he talks about how you have to understand that the decisions you make during your life, you're going to have to live with those forever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if this soldier goes home and he has a family and all of that, but yet in his mind he had committed this crime against a female. And my dad stopped it, and he said it took a lot because, in the service, it's rank, but they were taught ethics. They were taught ethics. And I think that's something that students need to talk about today.
So even if the military didn't teach them those ethics, I think it was just the culture of
it was the culture.
Society at the time.
Yes.
It was... I don't think there's ever been a time where that's supported or okay, but
not addressed.
I think it's another thing that you can point to for that generation that grew up during the Depression, understood the value of everybody, not just certain people, and given the demographics of the men who served, not just in that conflict, but pretty much all American wars.
Yeah.
Right? They have that sense of
purpose.
Yeah, like I'm going to go back home.
Yeah.
And I'm going to re-enter regular life.
Yeah.
How would I like it if that was my sister?
Yes.
Or my wife or girlfriend or something like that.
Exactly.
And it's such a dynamic.
It is.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this.
This has been fun.
And we will certainly stay in touch with us. Thank you so much.
Okay, love it.
Popular culture, by definition, connects and unites us, and proves that people of different backgrounds, in fact, have a lot in common with one another. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, at least in part, for that reason. If it connects with you and you'd like to add to it, or any of the podcast episodes, just visit everything-history.com and search for the Everything as a Primary Source project, which can be found in the classroom section of the website. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Be sure to rate and share this podcast wherever you are listening to it now, and follow Everything as a Primary Source on social media, including YouTube and especially Instagram. Thank you for listening to the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source.